A cold, dark night, and a homeless family of displaced persons can't find suitable shelter, so they have to go to the private sector to seek temporary accommodation, even though the mother is about to give birth. Attended not by a midwife and social services, but by shepherds and angels, a baby is born, the cost of its care offset by foreign aid, grants of gold, frankincense and myrrh.
In the bleak midwinter, frosty wind made more.
As Christmas approaches, the old story unfolds. But this year, with shoppers fighting over discounted goods and the financial update in the Chancellor's autumn statement yesterday, it's an opportunity to think about what sort of society we want to live in. But how can we do that in an era dominated by financialisation, when we're relentlessly taught by politicians the heresy that the only values we can usefully measure are economic? Surely we're missing some fundamental questions. What's the point of an economy back in the black if it doesn't produce a society you want to live in? What's the point of throwing good money after bad if it doesn't produce that sense of well-being or people with a sense of purpose? And what's the point of just massaging unemployment figures if the jobs we create are barely worth doing?
What can I give?
So here's my autumn statement. At the year's end, in gathering darkness, let's look beyond Black Friday and Cyber Monday and the fading digital radiance of a 50-inch discounted TV for a wholly unimaginable light breaking in a wholly unexpected place. Merry Christmas. Hello.
And from the churchyard of St Mary Abbots and Kensington High Street to our own little graveyard of broadcasting here at BBC Broadcasting House. Reverend Coles, welcome.
Hi, Andrew.
Is there too much emphasis now on getting and spending and not thinking about other things?
Yeah, I think there is, but I think there's a more sort of local problem, which is that we've lost the way of really effectively describing what it is that's important. It seems to me that we live in a world where we're always trying to put numbers on things, to do, I don't know, net present value, something like that, to give a balance sheet answer, to give an account of our problems. And I think that the problem is that we miss things that are really important, for which we don't really have reliable metrics, but that we know constitute a good life and contribute to the good of a society.
Don't we operate on the assumption, though, that if we are wealthier as a nation, even as individuals, that we will be happier and that we'll also, if we want to be able to do good things?
Well, that's true, but I think part of the kind of strange Christian paradoxical message is that if you want to know what it is to be wealthy, then give stuff away. We filmed that at St Mary Abbots. It was the Christian Aid Carol service this evening, and much of the talk of that was about tomorrow's vote in the Commons, third reading of the 0.7% bill. 0.7 of our GDP. We signed up to that to direct that into international development. They want to enshrine that in law, Michael Moore's private member's bill tomorrow. That would be a really good thing to do.
You're back into numbers.
Well, but you see, you can find numbers for these things, can't you?
So it's numbers when you like the numbers.
Well, these are good numbers, and these are really good numbers.
Which means the bigger the GDP, the bigger the 0.7% is.
And that would be great, and I'm all for it. And also, credit to the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, and indeed the coalition, for sticking to that target. So that's a good stuff. What I'm saying is that it's important that we, alongside our balance sheet realities, have a sense of what a balance sheet is for, to realise the goods in our society, in our lives, and globally.
And not just for the sake of it.
Exactly.
What do you say, Michael?
I say that a nationalised church has more and more given the impression that the way that you do good in society is by taxpayers being asked to pay more and more money and pay money over to other people. So our nationalised church has less and less emphasised the virtue of individuals doing things for other individuals. Our nationalised church has become, effectively a kind of socialist institution that believes that the higher the levels of tax, the higher the levels of public spending, the better life is going to be. And consequently, of course, people feel that their duties towards other people have been discharged. So I entirely agree with what Richard is saying about the state of society in which we find ourselves, but I think that his church is largely responsible for it.
I better let you come back on that.
All I would say is that we've moved a long way from being the Tory party at prayer.
You
we
certainly
were once
have.
caricatured as that. I mean, I think this is something beyond party interest, and I think what the church has always done is insist that there are values beyond those which are simply expressed in terms of economics, whether you do that from the left or the right or the centre or anywhere.
But Michael's
Yes.
point is that you see your value, the church's values, are the values of big government, high taxation, and expensive government.
Well, I'd suggest
The very example you gave, of course, was not, you weren't talking about Christians wishing to give money to developing countries. What you talked about was institutionalising in law an obligation on taxpayers to give money to third world countries. It's an absolutely perfect example of the way your church thinks.
Well, I think
And so then I'll bring Alan.
Okay, well, I would disagree with that. I think what we are saying, however, is wealth, fantastic. What are you going to spend it on? Use it creatively. What do you do when you've bought all your toys? What do you do when you've spent all your available wealth on stamp duty in order to buy that bigger house? What are you going to do with your wealth that's creative and interesting and exciting and dynamic?
Alan, you, in your autobiography, wonderful chapters and your life as a kid in great poverty, not just lack of affluence, in real poverty. And now you are where you are, become hold some of the great offices of state in your political career. Is there a link between affluence and happiness?
I think there is. I mean, we certainly weren't happy, and that this idea that there's some romance in being poor, is ludicrous. And all my mother ever wanted to do is to find a way to drag us out of poverty. So, I don't. Richard wasn't making that argument. I think it's very hard at the moment when you look at the fact that we've got a 50p tax rate reduced to 45p. And the bedroom tax implemented at the same time for the Tory party to kind of recapture, the Church of England being a Tory party at prayer. I mean, there are fundamental issues happening out there now, I believe, that Richard touched upon, that are really important.
He was much more right-wing when it was the Tory party at prayer.
Yeah.
Just for a moment, though, all the time that Gordon Brown was Chancellor of the Exchequer, and I think all the time when he was Prime Minister, but I was subject to being corrected on that, the top rate of income tax in this country was 40%.
Yeah,
the top rate of income tax under the coalition is higher than it was under the Labour.
Michael, that's a spurious argument. We
No, it's
weren't.
not
Yes,
spurious.
we hit
true.
we hit the biggest crash. I mean, we would not have put the.
Sure,
we wouldn't have put a tax rate up to 50p if it hadn't been.
But you've just followed, both of you, into this trap that Richard has told you. You're now arguing about tax policy. What you're talking about is we ought to be thinking about what kind of society we are.
What's the kind of vision that motivates us to do the things we do?
But
What are the things that are worth fighting
But that
for?
can't
What
be
are the things-
determined by whether the top rate's 45 or 50.
Some people do get excited about the sort of minutiae and details like that, and I know a little bit about balance sheets and details now, how important that is. But that serves a greater purpose.
There was a politician who talked a different sort of language. She talked about.
Well, that narrows it down if it's she.
She talked about self-reliance. She talked about the importance of people having the satisfaction of making their way through life. She talked about emancipating people, for example, by enabling them to own properties so that they would be more independent. This was a values-driven agenda. It wasn't about consumerism. And as I remember, you were fearfully opposed to it.
Well, because that was the 1980s, when values were much more a matter of debate, weren't they? Where politics was less managerial, less consensual, when you really did feel that they were things worth fighting for.
And you fought against them.
Well, I'm not nostalgic, I must say, for some of the politics of the 1980s. I'm not nostalgic for the miners' strike. I'm not nostalgic for the effect that had on industrialised communities. But I do have some nostalgia for a politics which was engaged with ideas that were important and significant and that mobilised people and got people, engaged.
Do politicians, do governments contribute to the moulding of our values now?
I think they do. You just mentioned the 0.7 of GDP. You could mention things like civil partnerships, gay marriage, a whole set of the human fertilisation, embryology. Where I would disagree with Richard is, that politicians somehow are not looking for the greater good, that we constantly. I mean, you have this thing called the autumn statement, which is almost at Christmas, that makes it and it becomes a big grand occasion as well as the budget. And it makes it look as if we are focused on these economic issues all the time. But politicians, you know, there'll be an adjournment debate somewhere this week about something, you know, fundamental that's nothing to do with it.
I didn't mean to malign politicians in that way. What I'm saying is that there's a kind of political discourse which obscures the kind of confident statements that we can make about those sort of values that are important. It's much more now about balance sheets, isn't it? On the one hand, you have sort of balance sheet realities. On the other hand, the stuff I talk about, I sometimes think can only be represented by emoticons. And we've got to do better than that. There are some good numbers in that 0.7 thing.
But so can I just pick, let's use the 0.7 just as a good example of what you're talking about, because that actually doesn't tell us about British society. It tells you about the values and priorities of the British political elite. If you were to do an opinion poll, I assure you, you would find the vast majority of people in this country do not want it enshrined in law. In fact, they probably want to cut it.
Well, I think in that case we've got our work cut out in making that argument. But I think it's a very significant thing that we enshrine in law a commitment in a way that transcends the political cycle,
I
would
have thought the organisation that has a bigger responsibility for establishing the values in society than politicians is the Church of England.
Right.
And, you know, we've been talking a lot on this programme about how the two main parties are now down at 30%. But quite honestly, the Church of England would kill for 30%, wouldn't it? Would it?
Well, in a sense, yes, but in another sense, no, because another of those paradoxical realities of Christianity is that when we are weak, we are often at our strongest in a way that...
Explain the paradox.
Well, exactly, that we talk about, you know, our gospel is a gospel in which the rich and the mighty are put down from the seats and the humble are exalted.
But in which way is the Church of England strong today?
I think I think it would be a lot stronger.
The pews are empty on Sundays.
They're not empty, but we're not doing as well as we used to do. But in a way, that's not the point, because I think one of the things that happens is that gives us an opportunity to rediscover something of the originality of what we preach, something that is kind of confrontational and counterintuitive and countercultural, and that would be a very good thing. That would leaven the lump for all.
Have you got a flat screen TV?
I do have a flat. I bought it for the Olympics. That's my excuse.
Oh, that's a good excuse. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.